Hey, this is Dr. C. Good to see you today. Voting day, primary only. Make sure you vote. Okay, we're going to have here today the hallucinogen 2. Remember the last time we talked about the hallucinogens, and we talked mostly about magic mushrooms. There's a lot of other psychedelic medication out there as well, most of which is either Schedule 1, which is totally illegal in the United States, and many of the others are 2, which are still illegal, but can be used sometimes for medical purposes. So basically, this is what we're going to cover today, at least as many as we can, outside of the psilocybin, the magic mushrooms. Okay, let's first talk about peyote. Now, peyote is basically it's derived from a little cactus. It's a spineless little cactus that's found in the southwest part of our country and in the northwest of Mexico. So it comes from the little buttons. Like they look like little buttons. They're not really called buttons, but they're like little buttons that are on this little cactus plant. And so that contains mescaline. Mescaline is the active substance that is psychogenic in there. So basically, it's been used for centuries by the Indians out in that area. Used mostly for spiritual and religious purposes. They will have little get-togethers, basically, in a teepee or whatever you want to call the homes and all. And usually it's quite a ceremony, which lasts for sometimes all night long. So the peyote itself, just like many of the other hallucinogens, work on some of the neurotransmitter substances in the brain, which include serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, a number of different neurotransmitters in the brain. And depending on where the higher concentration of the neurotransmitter substances or the receptors on the nerve endings are, that's the effect that substance will have on it. So, at any rate, peyote does affect the brain that way, and it does seem to have a predilection for what we would call executive function. Now, by executive function, that has to do with problem solving, planning, and a lot of the regulation of the other emotions as well. So those are the types of things that you would anticipate when you use peyote. So the peyote itself, as I mentioned, is located, the mescaline is located in those little buttons on the cactus. So what they can do then is they can take those little buttons, you can eat them. You can eat them, okay? Number one, very bitter, but nevertheless, you can eat them. You can put them into some water, and you can make a tea out of it. And they frequently will do that with them as well. You can also dry them and crush them up into powder. And obviously you can put them into a little capsule if you wanted to. So those are all the ways that you can consume the mescaline. In order to get on you might say, the reserve list to get into one of these things, you really have to nowadays be a member of the Native American Church. Now, the Native American Church was a result of a lot of the criminal stuff that we did to the Indians back when we first took them over. And so, very sad history in the United States as far as the poor Indians go. But nevertheless, we drove them west, and that's when they began to at least develop a lot of these ceremonies then using psychoactive substances like mescaline. So they would use the peyote, and eventually they began to incorporate the peyote, the mescaline, into religious type ceremonies. And so the mescaline itself, if they use it as a tea or whatever, that would be a sacred drink at their ceremony. And it's still available. Not too many Native American people around, or at least churches, Native American churches in this area of the country. Mostly it's in the west, like around Oklahoma, places like that. There are some in name in other locations like Indiana, Pennsylvania, etc. But they're not necessarily, number one, an active an active part of the church, the big church, and they may or may not have ceremonies with peyote. So if you wanted to participate, you'd have to really look and really get into it a lot more than what I am going to present to you. The peyote itself being a very bitter agent, if you drink the tea, it's very bitter. It can cause nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. And in fact, if you go to the ceremony, they will give you a little pot so you can throw up in the pot because it is such a common side effect of that. And besides the effect that it has on executive function, as I had mentioned, you can also get some effect on other serotonin receptors that are in the brain itself. And you can also get what they call a sympathomimetic effect, which is basically the nausea, the vomiting, elevated heart rate, blood pressure elevation, all of these other things that can happen. Okay, so that's peyote. The next one we're going to talk about is LSD. So that's lysergic acid diethylamide. That LSD is much easier to say. So that got popularized around the time that that Harvard professor acted, I guess, as a sponsor, as a proponent of using psychoactive medications. He was a psychiatry professor at Harvard and did get let go because of his propensity for the psychoactive materials. And so the LSD still persists, although it is very difficult to get in the United States. It is semi-legal in many other countries, but not in the United States. So it's a derivative, actually, of ergot. Now, ergot is a fungus that will deposit itself onto certain plants, like the oak, other specific plants that it grows on, rye, a number of different plants like that. And so it's collected, washed off, and made into a tea, or you can, again, dry it into a powder. And that's the way it is presented to you. Now, it's you can buy it as a what they call a blotter. And so these fine particles and all rest on an absorbent piece of paper and spread out. And you can actually define exactly the number of micrograms. Now, here we're talking micrograms, very powerful stuff. Now, we're not talking milligrams or grams, micrograms, thousandths of a gram of this stuff on every little blotter. And so you can pretty much take a fairly accurate amount of LSD. Certainly you don't start with the highest dose, because a lot of the hallucinogenic effect is dose related. So it gets worse the higher the dose that you take. So we ingest it then either as a blotter, or you may take that tea and put it onto sugar cubes. There's a number of ways that you can take it. But again, it is related, dose related, significantly dose related. So what else does LSD do? It does affect your mood, no question about that. It does affect your behavior. It all, just like the other hallucinogens, it has a major effect on the sensory system in your body. You get what we call a synesthesia, S-Y-N, aesthesia, which is an alteration of the sensations in your body. And so instead of seeing color, you may actually hear color. And instead of hearing music, you may look upon that as you would a color. And you don't hear it. So it may even enhance what you're actually hearing. Or, even worse, you may hear it out of body. You're looking at it out of body. There are some people who have described their trips, and they call these trips after you've taken your LSD. Very weird colors. They have some people in the dreams that they have who have like serpents. Remember that Medusa that you may be familiar with all the serpents coming out of the hair and all. You may see wild colors, brilliant colors, intense colors, a variety of different colors coming out of somebody's head. The shaman who's usually, or the person who's monitoring this, and you always need to have a designated monitor, regardless of which of these hallucinogens you use, they would describe this as a lot of the soul coming out of that person, out of the brain. I don't know if that's true or not, but, that's the way they interpret this sort of thing. A lot of the things about LSD have to do with continued problems that people will have after they use the LSD. They may get a lot of flashbacks. You may think after a month or two that you're free of all of the effects of LSD. You may not be. You may suddenly get a flashback. There have been instances, too, where people have developed schizophrenia. Not a good thing. Not a good thing. They can't always directly relate it to the LSD itself, but it's pretty suspicious when you've had a trip, especially if you've had a bad trip, and then you develop a major depressive disorder or a major psychiatric disorder. So, in other words, that is LSD. The next one we're going to talk about is ayahuasca. Now, ayahuasca, I should explain to you a little bit what the derivation of that is. It's a Mexican word. The aya means a soul, your soul. And huesca is a vine. So it's the soul of a vine. The ayahuasca is made from two plants, one of which has a thing called dimethyltryptamine. That is the psychoactive portion. Now, if you just took that alone and drank it down, it gets neutralized very quickly in the stomach. So what you need is an agent, an enzyme, that would help to prevent that breakdown in the stomach. And that is the second thing, the banistoperus. That is an MAO inhibitor, monoamine oxidase inhibitor. That allows that active DMT to do its thing, get absorbed. Now, once you take that substance, then you begin to notice at first the immediate change in the sensory system. And like I said, you sometimes will get a synesthesia. You may hear colors. You may see sounds. You may develop some type of hallucination, something that's not even there. And so these are all of the earlier effects after about 20, 30 minutes of using the ayahuasca. Now, in Mexico, and in other countries as well, Mexico, Costa Rica, Peru, some parts of Bolivia, and in Brazil especially, there are a number of churches that have adopted rituals using ayahuasca. And the one that I mentioned at first, the very first church, was a church that was founded by Irene Serra. The only reason I mentioned the Serra is because that's our director here. His last name is Serra. But this guy was definitely not the same family as Mark Serra. Definitely not. He was born in the late 1890s and lived to about 1971. At any rate, he founded this Santo Daime. Santo Daime is Brazilian, obviously. They speak Portuguese in Brazil. And so the Santo Daime blended the culture of Roman Catholic and a lot of the native religions as well, and then developed the use of the ayahuasca as part of their ceremony. Now, the ayahuasca is basically used like a communion. In other words, when you drink that tea, that they make a tea out of those two plants, as I mentioned, usually made by the shaman. Usually, and we have a bad reputation of with witch doctors, but the shaman are well-educated people in their own community. They are not the wild-ass witch doctors that you see on the TV and all. They are respected, highly respected people, and intelligent people. And they are in all of the countries down in Central and South America as well. And so that Santo Daime does have this ceremonial drink now, which is called, which is called huasca. So let's talk about that a little bit more. We get the synergism, like I said, because it does affect not just the serotonin receptors in the brain, but the dopamine receptors as well, glutamate receptors as well, and it may even have an influence on the endocannabinoid system in the body. So it does have a lot of effects on the neurotransmitters in the brain. All of the people who go to this ceremony have some form of nausea and vomiting. And so you're given a honey pot at first, empty of course, and so that you can relieve yourself. This purging is supposed to be part of the ceremony and part of the good part of what you're going to get out of this. Now, just like with, if you're Roman Catholic, look what happened to the church, the Christianity. You've got splintered groups coming off. All the Episcopals, Lutherans, Congregationalists. Well, you got the same darn thing happening with this Santo Daime. A lot of the churches have broken off now and do things a little differently, especially with their ceremonies. The Santo Daime, and Daime means give. So that's what it means in Portuguese. The Santo Daime use a lot of hymns, dances, prayers. Their ceremony will last all night. And you have a little bit of the ceremony, then you drink the ayahuasca tea. Lasts for about 2-3 hours, then you drink another cup load. So this goes on for a considerable amount of time. and it is available. Now, there are some Santo Daime churches in the United States, but very, very difficult for them to have this ceremony because of the presence of the the drugs themselves. And so if you want to go on a retreat, the ayahuasca retreat, they're referring you basically to go to the one in Peru, go to the one in Costa Rica, go to the one in Brazil, go to the one in Portugal. In other words, you got to get out of this country to go to one of these retreats. The retreat itself is 2 days, 2 nights that you use, and you drink the ayahuasca, and costs you about $1,000, roughly, just roughly. Okay. So we know that this sort of thing is going on in those countries, and so that is ayahuasca. Let's go on. We'll go on to, say, ketamine. Now, ketamine you can use here in the United States for medical purposes. It was introduced way back in the 1970s as an anesthetic agent. And then now it has evolved, so now they use it for pre-anesthesia. Now, the anesthesiologist, as soon as they give it intravenously, they look at the eyes first. The eyes begin to go in any way direction. They call that an nystagmus. Uncontrolled nystagmus, and the pupils dilate. They know that they're having an effect from the dose of ketamine that they gave. Now, the ketamine itself was approved as an anesthetic back in 1970, and it's still used. It's still used, but it can cause a trip. Now, there are ketamine clinics all around the country. There are several in Massachusetts, one in Worcester, a ketamine clinic. But it's used specifically, there are medical indications for sending somebody to that clinic. They will give an IV infusion, and they may have to go back every 2 weeks for a couple of visits and get another infusion depending on their symptoms. So the ketamine itself, besides being an effect on the sensory system, is also called a dissociative drug as well. So in other words, you may not necessarily have control of your motor function. It may distort some of the sounds, etc., that you're hearing. It may, as I mentioned, cause visual changes because of the nystagmus and the dilated pupils. And so that is one of the things about ketamine that we use. Presently, it's used basically for addiction. It's used for people who have difficulty with controlling their depression on the major antidepressants that are on the market. So the ketamine clinic, like I said, there is one in Worcester, and you can get a referral if you have some difficulties like that. Okay, let's go on. Next one we're going to talk about is ecstasy. Ecstasy. That is basically known as Molly, which stands for molecular. I don't know why they ever called it Molly, but that has as its active ingredient methylene dioxymethamphetamine. Whoa, better to call it MDMA. That way it's a hell of a lot easier to remember, MDMA. They call that the love drug. Now, a lot of the younger people are using ecstasy. And it is synthetic. It's not produced out of plants or whatever. It's made in the laboratory. It's a synthetic, and it comes out as a powder, so you can take it as a capsule. If you put the powder in the capsule, you can snort it, breathe it in, You can put it into your little cigarette with the marijuana, whatever, and smoke it. There are various ways you can take ecstasy. Again, it has an effect on the serotonin in the brain, which again has an effect not just on mood, on energy, but also your perception of things. Their perception may go totally off kilter as well. So you may see something and not really see it. You see something else, or you may see it distorted. Unfortunately, because it's used by the younger people like that, they frequently will mix it with other drugs or alcohol. Now, that is not the way it's supposed to be taken, but unfortunately, this is the way it is used. There are some benefits, they claim, with low dose. You get improved energy, a lot of empathy for other people, which is a good thing, I guess. They use it primarily for eating disorders, like if you had anorexia nervosa or something like that, or overeating. You may use it for that. Unfortunately, a lot of the people get a lot of side effects from the ecstasy. Everything from muscle cramps, uncontrolled, depression. If you overuse it, you may get a heart problem, even heart failure. There have been some deaths from it. And you may suddenly get an elevation of the temperature or blood pressure or heart rate. So all of those things suddenly will come on. Like I said, usually now if you're going for a treatment using ecstasy, they'll use it for PTSD, anxiety, eating disorders of various kinds. And so one unfortunate thing is that there's a lot of withdrawal symptoms. So there is some aspect of addiction with the ecstasy as well. So I could go on and on and on. We could talk about morning glory seeds, all sorts of nice things. The major ones we've talked about. So this is Dr. C, and if you want to, you can try to get it onto one of these retreats. Good luck. Have a good day.